So thinking happens to them. And then the next evolutionary step for humanity is the transcendence of thinking. It's an incredible shift in consciousness that will, of course, manifest when a sufficient number of humans have gone through this incredible shift in consciousness. The world that they create, of course, will look very different from the world that is created by humans who are completely identified with thinking. In other words, the world that is created by the egoic mind in its personal and collective aspect. Needless to say, the collective aspect of the egoic mind is even more insane than the personal aspect of the collective mind. So that's the world we create. I can't help it. Sometimes good intentions arise, and that's fine in humans who are still obsessed with their thought, possessed by their thought, egoically dominated, but they can see, well, we want to do something good. But they haven't overlooked the basic dysfunction in the human psyche, which is involuntary and compulsive and conditioned thinking. There's been no transcendence of thought. And then if you say, I want to change the world, you can see what's wrong with the world, but you cannot see the deep causes of why these things that are wrong with the world. You see the surface manifestations of what's wrong with the world and want to change things on the surface manifestations. For example, in early 20th century and late 19th century, there was the arising of people became very much aware of the terrible injustices and of course, there was the arriving of industrial revolution started in England, and there was terrible, the lower working classes were in a terrible condition, and so they can see, yes, there's something wrong here. And so certain theories arose that looked very good on the surface. We need to have a fairer society. These people are being exploited, and those are the ones who exploit. Communism, the ideas started growing. It sounds wonderful on the surface. We're going to change the world. But there's a very wise proverb, of course, that you're all familiar with, about the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And then finally, when the theory was put into practice, Russia, China, it didn't turn out so well. The intentions were good initially, I suppose, to a large extent, perhaps not 100% good, but they were good. And yet they created hell for millions. They created also, again, huge inequality between the people on top and all the others. And millions of people died. Because in order to bring about a better world, according to your theory, you had to kill a few million first. So if you overlook that there's a fundamental dysfunction in the human psyche, whatever plan you have to implement changes, honestly, I'm not saying don't do anything until you're totally enlightened. No, you're already relatively conscious, so you can participate, take conscious action, that's fine. Always knowing that the fundamental change is in human consciousness, and you need to embody that change while you take action. The transcendence of thinking means the transcendence of the egoic mind. It means that you are able to spend part of your time relatively free of compulsive thinking, certainly free of self-serving thinking and destructive thinking that continuously creates unhappiness for yourself and the people around you. How many people live the compulsive narrative in your mind that for many people is very negative, constantly critical, constantly complaining, never at ease with what is. There's always something wrong, fault finding, because the ego grows through the constant opposition, constant antagonism, never at ease, always looking for the next thing to complain about. And it strengthens the egoic self. The more you complain, offended is a new version these days. It's very popular on the internet. I'm very, very offended. Outrageous. How dare you? There are thousands or hundreds of thousands who go on every day, they look on their screen waiting for the next thing to be offended by. And the ego loves it. And for many of them, it's the only way they can inflate their ego, by sitting on the screen and sending out tweets. The transcendent of thinking is not any kind of regressive movement. We are not regressing to the state of somebody whose mind is relatively undeveloped and who does not have a problem with egoic thinking because there's very little going on in their minds. What used to be called, before it became politically incorrect, idiot or fool. The fool was, they were always, you could see happy fools. They don't, there's not enough thinking to make them unhappy, so they are below egoic thinking. In medieval times, every village had at least one village idiot or fool, and normal was accepted, essential part of the community. And even the royal courts had a fool, a very important figure, although that figure probably was just pretending to be a fool. And that was one of the most, sometimes very influential position in the royal court, but also one of the most dangerous jobs you could have, because you could lose your head at any moment. But only the fool was able to tell the king or queen what was wrong, by making it into a funny story. But the fool is more deeply connected, as we know from mythology. The fool is more deeply connected with the source still, hasn't gone as far out as a normally developed human. He's more simple. The fool, for example, relatively speaking, is a simpleton. It's like the Hobbit in Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit is a simple guy, doesn't think in complex terms, loves the simple things of life, loves eating and enjoyment. But why the fool has to go on this important mission that nobody else can carry out? That's a mythological motive. That's often the case, because the fool has a connectedness still with source that the more developed humans don't have. Similar motive in Forrest Gump, the movie. The fool does great things, this guy, Forrest Gump, because and life always supports him. If you watch that movie again, he He saves people in the war, he does heroic things, but he doesn't claim credit because he doesn't have much of an ego yet. And all his life gives him the next thing and the next thing, supports him. But we don't want to go there. When I say cessation of thinking, I'm not talking about regressing to the stage that is the pre-thinking stage of humanity. I'm thinking about rising above, pointing to the possibility of rising above thinking. So you stop thinking, which is normally associated with diminishment of consciousness, and transcendence of thinking is an intensification of consciousness, turning up the light. This is why the term attention and alertness, those terms are extremely important. They're also used in Zen very frequently. The Zen teachings could be described, if you wanted to summarize Zen, it would you can just say simple things like pay attention. There was one Zen teacher who would, whenever they asked him a question to explain Zen, he became quite famous. He would always raise his finger. Please explain Zen to us. What is Zen? I haven't quite understood yet. He was calling people to attention. Now, I had quite a few questions about, well, two things. One, quite a few questions about the refugees or migrants that are pouring into Europe. How there's some here that I picked at random, and then there are others. How best to be in a state of compassion and so on. It's already wonderful to see that there is a lot of compassion, especially in some countries, like Scandinavian countries, Germany, and so on. There is a lot of openness and compassion towards the suffering of others, and it's heartening to see that. There's also a lot of fear in other countries, and also in Germany and Scandinavia, of what might happen to their society, their cultural values, if there's a continuing inflow of people. So it's a question of balancing the heart and the head. A time will come when there will be no more borders, but at the moment, just as a time will come when we don't need laws anymore. But for the time being, they still have a function. If we open borders totally, then of course the entire social system would break down. There are not enough jobs for everybody. There's nowhere to live after a while. If millions and millions come in, that would be the end. So compassion is wonderful and needs to be balanced with wisdom. Compassion and wisdom. There's a balance, the middle way. The Buddha's recommendation is the middle way. The challenge is initially on a physical level, finding accommodation and work. A greater challenge is the integration, which hasn't really been done very well in most countries. So they need to focus on that, because if they don't focus on the integration, it could lead to huge challenges, which would be fine too, because humans evolve through challenges. But if you can have wisdom, then you no longer need a huge challenge. to develop, because by applying wisdom to a situation, which means a balanced view, by applying wisdom to a situation, you prevent it from becoming a huge challenge. And if you cannot apply wisdom to a situation, then it will become a huge challenge, and that will be fine too, because humans evolve through challenges. Wisdom usually means that, yes, there still be challenges, but you don't create gigantic challenges for yourself. In the absence of wisdom, you do. That's so it's an interesting fact that not only for individuals, but also for the collectives, there's a continuous, one thing after another arises. It's, oh no, now this. First it was Greece, it was the big challenge. And now you have an even bigger challenge. It's as if some script writer for the drama, the collective drama, infinitely creative script writing. Okay, what can we do now for the next episode of humanity? Oh, now let's give them that. It's a challenge for, of course, for the refugees themselves. It's a huge challenge, and for the others where they go to, it's also becoming a challenge and could become a huge challenge. Mindset. These people come from different places that represent different forms of conditioning of their mind, just as in the West the mind is conditioned in certain ways. So in the West is only just arrived at certain insights through painful, very painful, insane behavior that they manifest in until recently. They've only just arrived at a fragile realization of the importance of seeing another person's point of view, or another, coming to a compromise rather than wanting my way or our way, through incredible suffering that they inflicted on themselves. They've now arrived at this fragile point where they value tolerance and compassion. And that's been a long road, and it could be lost again easily. It's part of the growth of, it implies some diminishment of ego. In order to practice tolerance and compassion means, on a collective level, there has been some diminishment of ego, and it has happened through suffering that was self-inflicted, through endless wars, culminating in the insanity of the First and Second World War, and genocide, and so on. So all that self-inflicted suffering has finally brought them to this point, and it has been going on for centuries. They're gradually equality for women, to value equally man and woman, is also relatively recent. We've arrived at now. The separation of church and state also was a relatively recent achievement, and that took centuries again of struggle. And not all parts of the world have arrived yet at that stage. They're still stuck in other more intolerant mindsets. And this is why the integration is very important, because integration means, are they able to adapt to our mindset? Now, there are some people who say all cultures are totally equal, it's just different. I would suggest that there is such a thing as a development in cultural values and the development of collective consciousness. And if a society displays compassion and tolerance towards others, that is a sign that there has been a development in consciousness in that society. And if another society displays intolerance, then that hasn't happened yet. Even in European societies, not that long ago, there was huge intolerance. So, what is the mindset that people come with? Are they able to undergo the shift? That is the question. Is there going to develop an alternative society that has a totally different mindset in the same country? That remains to be seen. It is a challenge, There are many good signs. It's wonderful to see the compassion that is in many humans now in Europe. And it is also understandable that in others there's also fear. There are some small minorities in Europe that are very unconscious, that violently attack or try to attack immigrants, but that group is relatively small. So let's see where this challenge takes us. Humanity ultimately is going to evolve as a whole, as a single organism, more and more. So, and it seems natural that there's more coming together now of cultures that before were totally separate. Now it's growing into something that we cannot foresee what form it will take. Societies that are still in a different mindset, there are still places on the planet where the collective mindset corresponds to the Middle Ages in Europe. Not saying that those places cannot have humans who are highly evolved, just as in the medieval times in Europe there were human beings. Some human beings were deeply spiritual, egoless and highly evolved, even within those societies which collectively were quite ignorant and deeply in the grip of the collective ego, which in Middle Ages in Europe took the form of religious dogma and so on. So there are still some societies which are at about that time period, so that the shift can be speeded up if they come to the West. To what extent can they go beyond their mindset? And not all the refugees are from those parts of the world, because the Middle East, there are many different energy fields. Syria is not the same as Afghanistan, it's not the same as Iraq, and so on. There were ancient cultures in many of those places that predate European culture. And Islam, for example, in itself, Islam in the Middle Ages was more advanced and more tolerant than Christianity, more culturally advanced. And so it's not the religion, a religion does not exist outside the consciousness of the people who practice the religion. So really, what is the state of consciousness of the people who practice the religion. It doesn't exist outside of that. It's something in human consciousness. This is a huge thing that perhaps some other time we can talk about it in more detail. So let's welcome the challenge and see if you, on a personal level, if you live in Europe and you can help, you feel called upon to help, that's a wonderful thing to do. It's the whole evolutionary impulse of the universe is towards that. Somehow, and I cannot explain it in words, it's beyond, we don't even attempt to really understand what is behind that. It is far beyond understanding, but it's just to say that there is the evolutionary impulse of the universe is behind that. Consciousness wants to flower through the form, the human. It will flower through any form. It doesn't say you are more worthy than this, I will choose this form because you are more worthy. It flowers where there is a transparency, where the form, the rigid mind structures give way. They die first. Identification with that, me, mind-made self, goes. And this is why we're here, because as you sit here, you are finding death before death finds you. And the mind structures that you identified with as me, the thought forms die. So the flowering is happening here before death finds you. You embrace death already. But it doesn't matter when it happens. And consciousness will move through. It could be a criminal, killed several people, inflicted suffering on others, and of course on himself. And in that midst of hell, in his cell, waiting for execution, suddenly, inside, the entire structure of the self, mental, emotional structures, dissolves because the suffering is unbearable. And suddenly, something shines through. And now he doesn't care anymore whether the execution happens or not. And there have been cases like that. When this happens, sometimes when people speak about it and tell others about what happened to them, they may use certain words that correspond to their language or culture. But when you look beyond the words, you will see that they all point to the same. And there are some of those to whom it happens who can't even speak about it. They just look at you, and you look at them. They may be uneducated, they may not have much to say, and yet you look and you see there's something that shines through that is deeper than a person, and any person could be. The personal dimension has given way to that. And so it is sacred when that happens. But so far it's been relatively few human beings to whom this has happened. No longer the case now. It is the destiny of all humans to go through that transformation. It is certainly your destiny, otherwise you wouldn't be here. The purpose of your life is to enable that to come through you, and it's happening already. So we embrace the death that is here when you surrender to what is. That's the greatest death. The resisting me entity gives way. You can surrender through suffering, or you can surrender through voluntarily through the yes to what is, which, as we saw yesterday, takes you beyond the form. You are no longer reactive to a form. So the yes, that simple thing, takes you beyond form. And I pointed out yesterday, often that which you say yes to is some form of limitation, because it's form. And that in other cases, that which you say yes to may be some form of death, some form of loss. And that is particularly powerful. Any kind of loss or death leaves an emptiness behind when a form is no longer there. And you don't run away from that empty space. And it's an opening into the formless. One could say every form obscures God, and the death of the form enables God, which is the formless one life, to shine through. Therefore, death has long been recognized as sacred in ancient cultures who had not denied death, whereas the modern culture, modern Western civilization, denies death. It's not, they don't know it's sacred, they don't even want to talk about it. They don't want to see a dead body. You can't, it's not allowed. It's illegal to see a dead body. They would send you to a psychiatrist if you asked to see a dead body. There must be something wrong with you. So death is hidden because the Western culture is totally identified with form, with mind. So the worst possible thing for it is death. Oh my. And even in hospitals they don't know anything about death, where death happens continuously. Old people's homes. Every old people's home, if there is such, would be a spiritual center. The greatest ashrams would be old people's homes, because that is the potential of old age. But it's not recognized yet. So they would be the most sacred places. So these ancient cultures have recognized the sacredness of death, not knowing perhaps why. Intuitively, they knew it to be sacred. But now you can see why it is sacred. Because the formless shines through where there was the form. And that can happen when there's physical death, but it can also happen when you die psychologically to the me. And that is the spiritual transformation. And that can happen through intense suffering, or through the power of a spiritual teaching, or in many cases, a combination of both. And I suspect that in many of you, it's a combination of both. You've had the suffering, otherwise you wouldn't have come. And now there's the power of spiritual teaching, which tells you don't need to suffer anymore, and you don't need any more time before you can enter the surrendered state. Why would you need time to enter the surrendered state? Do you need more knowledge before you can enter the surrender? Yes, but before I enter the surrendered state, I need to understand the universe completely. You've had many pointers already. Everybody here has read scriptures, beautiful pointers. No, I have not yet fully understood the nature of the universe. I need a few more years, says the mind. And the amazing thing is, a deep understanding happens, not in the way that the mind imagines it. A deep understanding of the universe happens as you enter the surrendered state. And so to look for yourself in this movie show that continuously changes the impermanence of all things is a form of suffering. So wanting to hang on to this, identify with this. And the movie show includes, it's not just all the things that happen externally around you. The movie show is also the thoughts that pass through your mind. That's also really, that's also part of the, and they come and go. And what people get entangled with, even more than the so-called external world, ultimately it's all the inner world, and you put that aside. What you get entangled with is the much more so than every thought that comes, you get entangled in that. And look for your sense of self in that. You identify with the thoughts that come, your opinions, viewpoints, likes, dislikes. All. You believe every thought that comes that tells you what your life is all about. My life, I have to think about my life. It hasn't worked out. Not the way I wanted it to work out. Why did all this have to happen? And then I failed at this, I failed at that. Maybe I can still make it, maybe not. I need to think harder about me and my life. There must be a solution to the problem of me. But maybe if I see several psychotherapists, psychiatrists, maybe eventually they can help me find a solution to the problem of me, because I perceive myself as a problem, like a knot, K-N-O-T, like a knot that wants to be entangled, but it can't. Well, how do I do that? And then the psychotherapist, psychiatrist, psychoanalyst, a counselor may help you untie this knot of the unhappy me, but it takes a long time, and never really managed to do it until you realize that the entire knot is a kind of illusory construct, and on that level you can't do much about it. But if you realize it consists of thought plus emotion that you had identified with, then suddenly it's not a problem anymore, and suddenly you become aware of who you are beyond that. And then you let it be, as the song goes, and suddenly you are not a problem to yourself anymore, because you're not looking for your sense of identity anymore on the level of thought or emotion. And then thought becomes less problematic. Thought loses its capacity to make you unhappy. Because before, you might have noticed, most of the time when you get unhappy, it's because of certain thoughts that arise in your head that you completely believe in. Interpretations of situations, events, people, misinterpretations, very one-sided interpretation, as every interpretation is. It's just a viewpoint. And those things create unhappiness. Most of the time, that's what makes you miserable. If you become miserable, anxious, regretful, it's believing the thoughts that arise continuously, which are part of the movie show. So it's not just the movie show out here, it's also the movie show in your head. And so if you get dragged along in it, then it's a very confusing way to live. Yeah. You have no central sense of identity. And this is why so many people manifest in different situations. They manifest different aspects of their conditioned mind, which are sometimes called subpersonalities, or whatever. And you might have noticed those people in whom there is little or no awareness, they can change from one moment to the next, from one day to the next, and you have a different person, or one situation to the next. When they encounter certain situations, suddenly some other subpersonality comes up. This is still considered, this is not schizophrenia or anything like that. That's still considered within the realm of what is normal. So I was always amazed for the short periods in my life when I lived communally, how changeable people are. And I always remember every morning I would sit at breakfast in a community where I lived in England for a little while. And I'm always wondering who is going to come down the stairs from the bedroom, what aspect of their personalities. One day it's a wonderful day, isn't it? It's so great to be alive. And then the next day, leave me alone. This is a dreadful place. I'm trying to get out of here. I don't know how can people live in this place. It's so dreadful. And this is only... And other subpersonalities in humans are triggered by specific situations, sometimes involving money, or somebody dies, and then who is going to get the heritage, the funds, and then suddenly everybody becomes totally... Or certain people can do it because one person may remind you of somebody that you once knew who wasn't pleasant. All these things that you get entangled in with your sense of self, and that does not happen anymore, or if it does still happen occasionally to you, you'll fairly quickly wake up again and realize who you actually and essentially are. And that is, you are not your thoughts or not your emotions and not whatever arises and happens around you. You are the still center, so to speak. So it's a way of experiencing the world that frees you from the world internally without leading to a sense of separation. When I say it frees you from the world, it sounds almost as if you felt a sense of separation now between yourself and the movie show. There is a detachment, yes, but also as you interact with everybody, there is more of a feeling of non-separation that we interact with, because it's not your sense of self anymore that you're seeking to reinforce by interacting with other humans. So you can allow them to be as they are, and the judgmental mind either subsides completely, or you no longer believe in every judgment that comes into your head, every thought that arises. So that's a wonderful way that removes fear from your life. Because if you're entangled in the movie show of your life, it's fearful, because you cannot really hang on to anything for too long, and it cannot give you your sense of who you are. And it's fearful because you're ultimately the inability to trust life, which traditionally for example, in Christian terminology is called faith. Faith is the ability to have a basic trust in life. It's not faith in something. In some languages, faith and belief are the same word. But faith basically is belief is you believe that a certain story that you've been told is absolutely true, and it once happened and is absolutely true. Okay? And if somebody else doesn't believe it, then he's going to hell. He's going to hell because he doesn't believe the story. Okay? You don't believe my story? I'm going to kill you. That sounds funny, but it's still many people's reality. That's still many people's state of consciousness. But faith is something deeper. It's nothing to do with any story. Faith is a basic trust in life that can only come from this inner connectedness with that place of stillness within. That the absence of fear is trust. The inability to have this basic rootedness in being, if you don't have that, you will have fear, one form or another. You may not always be conscious of it, but it'll always be somewhere in the background, and sometimes very much in the foreground. So everybody here carries a life situation. You carry around with you, this is the person, the human, you carry around with you a life situation. And to a greater or lesser degree, the life situation that you carry with you is not easy. It is, well, there are good things about it. Yes, there's good things, there are nice, there are things that you can enjoy. Some aspects of your life situation are good, and other aspects of your life situation are very problematic. But, so there is a certain heaviness to the personal, the merely personal sense of existence. There's a certain heaviness to it. You carry the burden of yourself. And I'm talking now about if you are not at all in touch, especially if you're not at all in touch with the deeper dimension of the being dimension. At the moment, we're just talking about the human dimension. On the human dimension, the dimension of the person, you are a burden to yourself in a way. It might not be a huge burden, or for some of you it may be a huge burden. And the problematic areas in your life situation, you can see it either involves the physical body that becomes problematic through creating whatever dysfunction, illnesses, and so on. There's the physical as the huge problem area for some. There is your work or professional situation or things related to that. There is your financial situation, difficulties in that realm of existence, very common area of suffering for people. There is, and now a huge one comes now, it's called other people. So you'll find that many of the challenges, problems or difficulties in your life situation are caused by other people. If you only could get rid of other people, all those problems would be gone. And all you would have left is your body and, but of course then there's no more money coming in because you need others. Okay, that doesn't work. So you can see your living situation. It might be other people, either the people, your intimate relationships, or people in your family environment or background that are making life difficult in one way or another for you. Now, we're not talking about to what extent you contribute to the problems, but so we have work or professional difficulties. Maybe your boss, your company suddenly gets swallowed up by another company, and after 35 years of faithfully working for this company, the boss calls you in and says, well, as you know, we just got bought out by this big conglomerate, and I'm afraid we'll have to let you go. Goodbye. Now what? I have a mortgage, I have a family, I've got a huge obstacle suddenly. Or you might just think about the possibility that it might happen. It hasn't happened yet, it might never happen, but you wake up at 3 in the morning and but you will be challenged, physical, relationship, financial, living situation, and those are the main areas where people get challenged. And it's very rare that a human being experiences life going harmoniously and smoothly in all those areas, in all of them. My physical body is doing great, I'm totally healthy, fantastic relationship. My children are all doing so well, they're just fantastic, they're all succeeding beyond all expectations. My partner is a person just experiencing fantastic happiness continuously. I have a great income and my investments are doing really well. We have a great house and we're thinking of buying a private jet soon. It's all just great, just fantastic. It's very rare. And if it does happen, if there's one of you here who at the moment is experiencing that particular fantastic life situation, I don't want to disappoint you, so it's not going to last. It can. And the ego has, of course, what the world tells you on the one hand, not for you, because you're all, truly speaking, relatively much more conscious than the majority of the population. Without, it's not an ego thing, so don't make it into a conceptual identity, but the fact that you're here means that there is an awakening consciousness in you, which is still relatively rare, although it is growing. And so what the world tells the unconscious people, all the things that the celebrities, their life, all these magazines that tell you about the glamorous life of the celebrities. And then on the one hand you have that, and then the ego says, oh, I wish I had that or that. And then the great satisfaction that the life of these celebrities continuously is collapsing, all the relationships are breaking down and they're suffering, and you get these pictures on the magazines where they look miserably unhappy. They just her fourth marriage is now breaking down, and huge drama is happening to this person and they were on their private jet, and then it all happened there, and they broke up, and then the ego says, oh, it's great, I'm not the only one who is unhappy, they're all unhappy. So the human level, and so the being level, is that which brings in something very different, that makes the burden of the self much easier to bear, because it diminishes the heaviness of the self, the personalized self, the conceptualized identity. It diminishes the burden that otherwise you carry of yourself, that you're completely identified with. You still have a life situation that may be problematic, but there is another dimension arising in you that gives you a sense of freedom or almost detachment from your life situation. Not only that, they don't exist completely separately. The awareness that is arising in you also flows into your life situation and changes the way in which you deal with the challenges of life through the awareness. And as you change the way in which you deal with the challenges of life, the nature of the challenges also changes. The duration of the challenges also often changes. Instead of being a very prolonged challenge in your life, by approaching it in a different way, by responding to the challenge in a different, non-reactive way, often the very obstacle turns around and becomes an opening into something else that is good. That is how a difficulty, when your so-called future is determined, and your whole life is determined not by the things that happen. That doesn't determine your life. What determines your life is how you respond to what happens to you. And so that is, your freedom lies there.
So last year, I asked you a question about my 2-year-old son, Teddy. And I look back on it now, and I feel like I've awakened more, because the question was asked in more fear than presence. And today I stand here and I have so much enthusiasm, because my son, who's 3 years old now, he has this childlike trust and faith that has not diminished from, he had severe acid reflux when he was a baby, and he went through intense physical suffering because of that since he was born. And it was hard for me as a mom to be present with that, because for a long time I didn't know how to help him. But now he's 3 years old, and now he can look in my eyes and say, "Mommy, don't think, be happy." Or, "Oh, your pain body, Mommy." I feel like it's a big irony, because this whole time I've been thinking, oh, what can I do to protect his innocence and his childlike nature and his consciousness? Whereas the whole time, he's my spiritual teacher. And I feel like children and also elderly people who've gone through life have this innate just knowing. They have a knowing. And for me to have that realization and to dive deep within in that stillness that they have, and to know how precious it is the biggest joy of my life. And so also my father has cancer, and in the midst of my son having reflux and my father just getting diagnosed with stage 3 cancer, I was looking on the surface. There was much suffering on my part and trying to be present with it. But now, 3 years later, looking back and seeing how my father has transcended his physical body and is in much greater peace than I could ever exude, and as well as my son as well, it's just a huge blessing.
Oh, yes. Oh, thank you for sharing that. I'd just like to comment on some of those things said. very young people you mentioned, and older people, and you mentioned your father who is suffering from that illness. It often happens if there's suffering at an early age, like the physical suffering of your child at an early age, can sometimes accelerate the awakening of a human being. Now, this could be physical suffering, or it could be other forms of suffering at an early age. For example, when there's a young child and one or both of the parents suddenly die in an accident or whatever, and so the child is deprived of something that would be regarded as absolutely essential, but the child is in deprivation early in life. And again, this is a huge challenge for a human being to have this great loss or physical suffering early in life. But sometimes it happens that this challenge then generates the transcendence already at an early age. It can also, of course, have negative consequences, so that then the child becomes an adult and then has to live with the burden of past pain for a long time, until perhaps finally at that point more awareness comes in and dissolves it. But it does happen sometimes that early suffering brings about already a very early transcendence in a human being, and that probably happened to your son. And that's just wonderful. And then the child can become your teacher, so to speak. And you mentioned old people. Again, there's a huge potential in old age that is still unrecognized by mainstream society. And that's the potential of letting go of ego. When you see the end of your lifespan approaching, why hang on to this entity in your head, me, that still needs to be right and still complains and still has its old patterns? To step into no thought, become nobody. I would highly recommend not to wait until old age. But old age, is a wonderful opportunity for opening up. And our society doesn't know what to do with old age. I think it's just a waiting room. You wait to die. But of course, there was more wisdom in some traditional societies where they recognized the value of old age, and the most highly respected people in those older societies were old people, the elders, because they recognized that there was something was just prior to the dissolution of the physical form. Somehow the psychological form was already dissolving before the physical form dissolved. And the me entity. And so humans recognized that old people would often become luminous in the last years of their life, and wisdom would speak through them. So traditionally, they go to the elders if they have important questions to ask, because they realize there is an intelligence that comes through them that is not there in the young people who are still identified with their form, psychological and physical form. So old age is wonderful but don't wait for it. I would say there's no need to get close to physical death to become present. Wait for that. Or what was it that Saint Augustine was it who said, God, he said something like, God save me, but not yet, because he still wanted to enjoy the things of this life. I want salvation, but not yet. So we have young people, and there are more young people being born now who have a high degree of readiness for awakening. So now, and then we come to an illness that comes into your life, like cancer, and again, it has that can also bring about the flowering of consciousness, because it can also erode. We talked about it yesterday. It can also erode in you the egoic entity, and so very little time left. You cannot project yourself anymore into the future. You are forced into the present moment. If you leave the present moment, you suffer, you become very unhappy. So that applies to people in prison for a long time, or people with a serious illness. And in the case of your father, this shift has already happened in him, and that's wonderful. And of course in you also, without having to wait for old age and an illness. So, thank you.
Thank you.